She walked onto the naval base in faded civilian clothes, just another bureaucrat with a worn badge. The sailors laughed when she asked about the nuclear submarine. Then the ocean began to swell. The massive vessel surfaced directly in front of her, as if answering her personal call. The gray spring morning at Naval Station Norfolk hung heavy with mist, softening the edges of America's largest naval base as it slowly stirred to life. At 5:47 a.m., a nondescript government sedan pulled into a restricted parking area, and Dr. Sarah Chen emerged into the cool Virginia air. At 47, Sarah possessed the kind of understated presence that made people look right through her, exactly as intended. Her weathered charcoal blazer had seen better years, her sensible flats showed wear from countless government corridors, and her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that suggested function over form. The only hint of official business was a faded Department of Energy badge clipped to her chest, its plastic surface dulled by time and bureaucratic indifference. Sarah walked with quiet purpose toward Pier 12, her calculating eyes methodically scanning the bustling naval environment around her. Sailors moved with practiced efficiency, loading supplies, conducting maintenance, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to her civilian attire. The morning air carried the familiar sense of salt water, diesel fuel, and fresh paint, the perfume of military readiness. As she approached the security checkpoint, Chief Warrant Officer Eduardo Martinez looked up from his morning clipboard duties. His 20 years of naval service were evident in the deep lines around his eyes and his immediate, almost instinctive assessment of Sarah as an outsider, another civilian who didn't belong in his world of precision and protocol. ID and authorization, Martinez said flatly, not bothering with morning courtesies. His tone carried the weariness of someone who had dealt with countless bureaucrats over the years, each one believing their paperwork granted them access to classified military operations. Sarah held up her badge without fanfare. Department of Energy, Special Oversight Division. Martinez examined the credential with thinly veiled contempt, his experienced eyes noting the worn edges and faded printing. Another audit? His voice carried a mixture of resignation and irritation. We just had Pentagon people through here last month and NCIS the month before that. You people need to coordinate better. Not an audit, Sarah replied evenly, her voice maintaining a professional calm that suggested she was accustomed to such receptions. I need information regarding the scheduled movements of the USS Colorado. The chief's eyebrows rose sharply at her request. Around them, several sailors paused in their morning duties, exchanging meaningful glances. An Ohio-class nuclear submarine wasn't something civilian administrators typically inquired about. These vessels represented the most secretive and lethal components of America's nuclear deterrent. Ma'am, that information is classified at levels well above civilian oversight, Martinez said, handing back her badge as if it were slightly contaminated. I'd need to see specific clearance documentation, signed authorizations, and probably approval from my commanding officer. My clearance level is clearly noted on the badge, Sarah maintained, her voice remaining calm despite the growing audience of increasingly amused sailors who had begun to gather around the checkpoint. A young petty officer named Davidson leaned against a nearby bollard, making no effort to hide his entertainment at the exchange. Lady, those boats don't surface for pencil pushers, he said with a grin, drawing appreciative chuckles from his colleagues who had stopped their work to watch the civilian get dismissed. You'd have better luck asking to see the president's nuclear football. Martinez's weathered face twitched with a suppressed smile, clearly enjoying the support of his crew. Tell you what, ma'am, he said with mock helpfulness that barely disguised his intent to isolate and dismiss her. If you're really interested in submarines, why don't you wait by the edge of the pier? You'll get a great view of the harbor from there. Maybe you'll even see some dolphins. The suggestion was delivered with the kind of patronizing tone reserved for persistent civilians who refused to understand their place in the military hierarchy. More laughter rippled through the gathered sailors as Sarah nodded once, seemingly unfazed by their obvious attempt to marginalize her. She turned and walked toward the designated spot at the pier's edge, becoming a solitary figure against the vast expanse of gray water. The sailors watched her go with dismissive headshakes and knowing smirks before returning to their duties, convinced they had successfully handled another bureaucratic intrusion. But as the minutes passed and the morning routine resumed around the base, Sarah remained motionless at the water's edge, her posture suggesting not the defeated stance of a dismissed official, but the patient waiting of someone who knew exactly what she was expecting to see. Deep within the base's operations center, Commander James Williams was beginning his morning review of routine sonar data when something decidedly non-routine appeared on his primary display screen. The blue-green glow of multiple monitors illuminated his increasingly concerned expression as he leaned forward in his chair, studying the unexpected signature. "Petty Officer Chen, run that sonar trace again," he ordered the technician, whose fingers were already flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Same result, sir," came the immediate response. "Unidentified submarine signature approaching from the southeast quadrant. Deep channel approach, maintaining 15 knots, depth approximately 400 feet. "That's impossible," Williams muttered, his mind racing through the morning's scheduled operations. "Nothing's supposed to approach from that vector. We don't have any boats due back and certainly nothing unannounced." He reached for the secure communications console, his fingers automatically finding the encrypted channel that connected him to Sublink Command. "Get me Submarine Force Atlantic immediately," he barked into the handset. "And while you're at it, check with Comsublint to see if we have any Allied vessels conducting unannounced exercises in our operational area." The operations center, normally humming with the quiet efficiency of routine monitoring, began to buzz with increasing tension as reports filtered in from multiple stations. The watch supervisor approached Williams's station with a growing sense of unease. "Sir, I've checked with all relevant commands," the supervisor reported. "All scheduled submarines are accounted for and reporting their positions as expected. No Allied nations have filed notices for operations in our area. And the vessel isn't responding to any of our secure communications protocols." Williams felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. In his 15 years of naval operations, unidentified submarines approaching major naval installations were the stuff of war games and worst-case scenario briefings, not routine Tuesday mornings in peacetime. "Sir," a young ensign called out from across the operations center, her voice tight with stress as she studied the tracking system display. "Based on current trajectory and maintained course, whatever this contact is, it's heading directly for Pier 12. Commander Williams's eyes narrowed as the implications of this information hit him. An unidentified submarine making a direct approach to a specific pier wasn't coincidence. It was either an intelligence operation or something far worse. "Activate base security protocols immediately," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the gravity of the situation. "I want armed response teams at Pier 12 within 5 minutes. Alert the base commander, notify NCIS, and get me a direct line to Norfolk Naval Security." As personnel throughout the operations center scrambled to respond to his orders, a senior sonar technician looked up from his station with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Commander," the technician called out, his voice carrying a note of disbelief, "the contact is beginning to surface." "What's its position?" Williams demanded, already knowing the answer would complicate everything. "Directly in front of Pier 12, sir. It's coming up right where that civilian woman is standing." Williams's gaze snapped to the security camera feed that monitored the pier area. There, clearly visible on the screen, stood Sarah Chen in her unremarkable civilian clothes, motionless at the pier's edge, watching the water with what could only be described as expectant calm. "Who the hell is that woman?" he whispered to himself, but the question carried clearly through the suddenly silent operations center. Chief Martinez was savoring what he had assumed would be a quiet morning coffee when the base-wide alarm system shattered the peaceful routine. His radio immediately crackled to life with urgent voices calling for security teams, emergency response protocols, and immediate lockdown procedures. Confused and slightly annoyed at having his coffee interrupted, Martinez looked toward the water to see what could possibly warrant such a dramatic response. What he saw made him freeze in place, his cup halfway to his lips. The surface of the water before Pier 12 had begun to swell in a way that defied his decades of naval experience. A massive displacement was forming where absolutely no vessel should be, a circular disturbance in the water that grew larger and more pronounced with each passing second. Without warning and without any of the usual surface protocols or supporting vessels, the black steel hull of an Ohio-class nuclear submarine began to breach the surface directly in front of Sarah Chen. The massive vessel rose from the depths with an almost supernatural silence, water cascading from its hull as it emerged like some ancient sea creature answering a primal call. Martinez's coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the concrete pier in a spray of ceramic and steaming liquid that he didn't even notice. Around him, the entire pier fell into complete, stunned silence as the impossible became reality before their eyes. The submarine wasn't approaching a designated docking area. There were no tugboats, no support vessels, no advanced preparation or clearance procedures. It was simply there, materializing from the depths as if summoned by some invisible force, its massive bulk settling into position with mathematical precision directly facing the woman they had all dismissed as just another bureaucrat. Armed security personnel arrived at a dead run, taking defensive positions around the pier with their weapons drawn and ready. But their faces betrayed the confusion and uncertainty that gripped everyone present. How do you respond to a submarine that appears without authorization, yet clearly belongs to your own fleet? The vessel's conning tower emerged fully from the water, revealing specialized markings and insignia that even Martinez, with his 20 years of experience, didn't recognize. These weren't standard fleet markings. They suggested a classification and purpose that existed beyond normal naval operations. The submarine completed its surfacing maneuver and held position with impossible steadiness, its bulk creating a wall of black steel between Sarah and the stunned naval personnel behind her. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of displaced water against the pier and the distant hum of the base's emergency response systems. Then, with a sharp hydraulic hiss that cut through the morning air like a blade, the submarine's top hatch opened. Captain David Reynolds emerged onto the platform, his uniform crisp and his bearing military perfect despite having just surfaced from the depths in completely unauthorized circumstances. What happened next would be burned into the memory of every sailor present for the rest of their careers. Without hesitation, without uncertainty, and with the kind of precision that spoke of absolute recognition of authority, Captain Reynolds rendered a sharp, formal salute directly to Sarah Chin. The gesture was unmistakable, a recognition of superior authority, an acknowledgement of command, and a demonstration of respect that left no doubt about the true nature of the woman standing at the pier's edge. Chief Martinez approached Sarah slowly, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The confident dismissal he had shown her less than an hour ago had been replaced by bewilderment and a growing sense that he had fundamentally misunderstood something critical about the morning's events. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying none of its earlier contempt, "I don't understand what's happening here. That vessel, it's not supposed to be here. We had no advance notice, no scheduling, no clearance protocols. And submarines like that, they don't report to civilian oversight. They're classified assets under direct military command." Sarah turned to face him, and Martinez was struck by how much her demeanor seemed to have changed. The patient, almost submissive civilian who had accepted his dismissal was gone, replaced by someone who carried herself with quiet but unmistakable authority. Without speaking, Sarah reached inside her weathered blazer and slowly withdrew something that had been hidden beneath her faded Department of Energy badge. It was a small obsidian card, its surface embedded with what appeared to be platinum circuitry that caught the morning light in complex patterns. At its center was a single red star that seemed to pulse with significance. "I know what they don't report to, Chief," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that it hadn't possessed during their earlier exchange. "They report to me." The obsidian card seemed to have an almost hypnotic effect on Martinez. He had never seen anything like it, but somehow he understood that he was looking at authority that existed beyond his comprehension, a level of clearance and command that operated outside the normal chains of military hierarchy. Commander Williams arrived with additional security personnel, their weapons drawn and their faces tense with the uncertainty of the situation. But as their eyes fell on the card in Sarah's hand, a dramatic change came over the entire group. Weapons were immediately lowered, defensive postures relaxed, and several of the senior personnel actually stepped back in what could only be described as deference. Williams himself went visibly pale as the implications of what he was seeing settled over him. "Authorization Omega," he whispered, the words seeming to carry a weight that made the air itself feel heavier. "You're deep well." Sarah nodded once, a simple gesture that carried more authority than any shouted command. She turned toward the submarine, her voice carrying easily across the water as she addressed the waiting captain. "Captain Reynolds, secure your vessel and prepare for immediate inspection. The situation we're dealing with is significantly more complex than our initial assessment indicated." "Yes, ma'am," Captain Reynolds replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who understood exactly who he was addressing and what her authority represented. Martinez stood rooted to the spot, feeling his entire worldview crumbling around him as the reality of the situation became clear. This woman wasn't just another bureaucrat with delusions of importance. She was something far more significant. Someone who wielded authority over America's most lethal military assets through a system of oversight that he had never known existed. The submarine captain's immediate and unquestioning response to her commands made it clear that this wasn't some elaborate mistake or misunderstanding. Sarah Chin represented a level of civilian control over nuclear assets that operated completely outside the normal military command structure. "Chief," Sarah said, turning back to Martinez with eyes that now seemed to carry the weight of decisions that could affect the survival of nations. I'm going to need immediate access to your secure communications center. We have a situation that requires coordination with multiple commands, and time is not on our side. 30 minutes later, the main briefing room at Naval Station Norfolk had been hastily converted into a secure command center. Senior officers from across the base sat around a polished conference table, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion, concern, and growing alarm as Sarah prepared to explain the morning's extraordinary events. The room itself seemed to hum with tension as Sarah activated a secure laptop and connected it to the room's main display system. When the first slide appeared on the screen, showing a complex timeline of intercepted communications and suspicious naval movements, the atmosphere became even more charged. "Gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone delivering a briefing that could reshape their understanding of national security, 3 weeks ago, our monitoring systems detected significant anomalies in nuclear fleet communication protocols. Someone has been systematically attempting to insert unauthorized command pathways into our most sensitive naval assets. The briefing room fell into complete silence as satellite imagery appeared on the main screen. The images showed Russian naval movements near Alaska that seemed far more coordinated than routine exercises, along with unusual Chinese submarine activity in the South China Sea that suggested careful timing and purpose. "What you witnessed this morning wasn't just an inspection or a routine verification," Sarah continued, advancing to the next slide that showed communication intercepts and code analysis. "It was a critical test to determine whether the USS Colorado would respond to legitimate civilian oversight rather than potentially compromised military channels." Commander Williams leaned forward in his chair, his face grave with the implications of what he was hearing. "Are you suggesting that our chain of command has been infiltrated? That someone has compromised our nuclear command and control systems?" "I'm not suggesting it, Commander," Sarah replied, sliding a secure data drive across the polished table surface. "I'm confirming it. This drive contains detailed evidence of a coordinated attempt to establish shadow control over our strategic nuclear assets. We've identified 3 admirals, 7 senior officers with launch authority, and clear evidence of coordination with foreign intelligence services." Captain Reynolds, who had joined the briefing after securing his submarine, spoke up with obvious concern. "The surfacing maneuver this morning, that was a test of our response protocols?" "Exactly, Captain. And it was a test that you passed. Your submarine responded immediately to Omega Protocol authorization rather than the countermanding orders that I know you received exactly 17 minutes before beginning your surfacing procedure." The implications of her statement hit the room like a physical blow. Someone within the military command structure had attempted to prevent the submarine's response to Sarah's legitimate authority. The breach wasn't theoretical, it was active and ongoing. Captain Reynolds's face went pale. "Ma'am, are you saying that someone tried to override your authorization? That there are compromised elements actively working against deep well protocols?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Captain. And it gets worse." Sarah advanced to another slide showing financial transaction records, encrypted communications logs, and intelligence analysis that painted a picture of sophisticated, long-term planning. "This operation has been in development for at least 18 months, she explained. "We've identified financial transactions routing through shell companies in Singapore, encrypted communications using diplomatic channels to avoid detection, and several key military personnel who have been systematically compromised through a combination of blackmail, financial incentives, and ideological manipulation." The room buzzed with quiet conversation as the officers processed the magnitude of what they were learning. This wasn't a simple security breach or isolated incident. It was a comprehensive attempt to subvert America's nuclear deterrent from within. "Our analysis suggests the ultimate goal isn't to launch our weapons," Sarah continued, "but to ensure they can't be launched when needed. The perfect compromise of nuclear deterrence, creating strategic paralysis during a first strike scenario." As the briefing continued, Sarah revealed the true scope and purpose of the organization she represented. The officers listened with growing amazement as she explained a system of oversight that had existed in the shadows for decades, unknown to most of the military establishment it was designed to protect. The civilian oversight program known as Deep Well was established in 1983 under President Reagan, Sarah explained, after a series of incidents during the Cold War that demonstrated the potential vulnerabilities in our nuclear command structure. A NATO exercise called Able Archer nearly triggered a Soviet first strike because Moscow misinterpreted our training activities as preparation for actual attack. She paused, allowing the historical context to sink in before continuing. Separately, there were multiple incidents where equipment malfunctions, communication failures, or human error nearly resulted in accidental launches of nuclear weapons. The Reagan administration recognized that traditional military command structures, while effective for conventional operations, might be insufficient during nuclear crisis situations. Commander Williams asked the question that was on everyone's mind: so Reagan created a shadow authority? Civilians with the power to override military command. Not shadow, supplementary, Sarah corrected. Deep well operators are civilians with specialized training who have direct command authority over nuclear assets, but only under very specific circumstances. When there's evidence the chain of command has been compromised, when false launch orders are detected, or when fail-safe systems themselves have failed. The implications were staggering. For decades, unknown to most of the military establishment, civilian operators had possessed the authority to directly command nuclear submarines, strategic bombers, and missile silos. Who selects these operators? Captain Reynolds asked. Who oversees them? How do we know this system itself hasn't been compromised? Sarah nodded approvingly at the question. A classified oversight committee with representatives from all three branches of government. 2 Supreme Court justices, 3 senior members of Congress from both parties, and 2 executive branch officials who are specifically excluded from the normal nuclear chain of command. The committee selects operators based on extensive psychological evaluations, ethical assessments, and absolute political neutrality. Chief Martinez, who had been uncharacteristically silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. Ma'am, this explains something that's always puzzled submariners like me. Our launch protocols include verification steps that seem redundant, sometimes even contradictory to normal command procedures. Exactly, Chief. Those protocols are designed to be recognized by deep well operators. They allow us to confirm that systems are responding to legitimate authority rather than compromised command channels. The room fell silent as the officers contemplated the implications of what they had learned. For their entire careers, they had believed they understood the system they served. Now they realized there had been another layer of protection operating invisibly above them. How many of you are there? Williams asked quietly. Sarah's response was simple but chilling: enough. Over the following hours, as the crisis response unfolded across the naval base, the true extent of Deep Well's capabilities became apparent. Sarah coordinated with other operators stationed at strategic locations around the world, revealing a network of civilian oversight that existed parallel to, but independent of, military command structures. By evening, 3 admirals had been quietly removed from active duty pending classified investigations. 7 officers with nuclear launch authority were in custody, and a sophisticated communication system designed to issue false orders had been identified and disabled across multiple naval assets. The immediate threat has been neutralized, Sarah reported to the assembled officers as the sun began to set over Norfolk. But this incident has revealed vulnerabilities in our command structure that will require ongoing vigilance and potential systemic changes. Chief Martinez approached her as she prepared to leave the base, his demeanor completely transformed from their morning encounter. The contempt and dismissal had been replaced by something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about everything that happened today," he said quietly. "I realize now that while we've been focused on protecting the country from external threats, you and people like you have been protecting us from ourselves." Sarah nodded, understanding the philosophical weight of his observation. "The Constitution created a system of checks and balances for a reason, Chief. Deep Well is simply another check, created after we recognized that nuclear weapons represent power beyond what the Founding Fathers could have imagined. But it operates in complete secrecy," Martinez observed. "How do we know such a system won't be corrupted itself? Because we operate under constant oversight, because we have no political affiliations, and because we only emerge from the shadows when absolutely necessary," Sarah replied. "Our authority exists precisely because we don't seek to use it." As she walked toward her waiting vehicle, Sarah removed her civilian badge one final time, revealing the obsidian card beneath before tucking it away inside her jacket. The symbol of extraordinary authority was returning to invisibility, waiting for the next time the nation's survival might depend on guardians who operated beyond the normal structures of power. "Will we see you again?" Martinez called after her. Sarah paused at her car door, turning back with a slight smile. "Only if something goes wrong, Chief. Let's hope we don't meet again." As her nondescript sedan disappeared into the Norfolk evening, the naval base resumed its routine operations. But now, every sailor understood that somewhere in the shadows, unseen guardians watched over them, ready to surface when duty called, just like the submarine that had answered one woman's silent command. The badge that had seemed so ordinary that morning now carried a weight of understanding. In a world where nuclear weapons could end civilization in minutes, sometimes the greatest authority belonged to those who remained invisible, carrying their enormous responsibilities in silence, emerging only when the balance of power itself hung in the balance. And in naval bases around the world, other ordinary-looking badges waited in the shadows, worn by guardians whose true authority would only be revealed when the next crisis threatened the delicate systems that kept global catastrophe at bay.